Well, now that I have this positioned a little closer to the front door, ready to go home here when I get this tied up, there's a few things that I need to do. I need to put a latch on the back window. I got another bolt to put into the latch of the front door. And these strings here that I tied the front canvas on with, I do need to back splice those. You know, you hate to see these just unravel and become kind of a mess. And this is something that most shepherds and probably any cowboy would be able to do just by making the first three into a Turk's head and then just back splicing. I only use 1/4 inch hemp rope on this. And it's just a standard procedure of any 3-strand rope. That's your initial Turk's head, and then you just wind it back on itself. Kind of go over the close one and underneath the next one. Pretty standard stuff. You can find this anywhere on YouTube or internet on how to do it. We spent a lot of time in the backcountry, wilderness country, packing with horses, and Rick that does the carriage lamps, my brother-in-law, he and I would pack into the Zorkey Beartooth Wilderness with teams. I would take my team in, and they would become my pack horses, and one was rideable as well and drivable, but they make great pack horses. They were crossbred, 1/4 horse Percheron crosses. And so we packed moose and elk and deer out on those pack horses. And you're always highlining, and you break a rope, and always working with ropes. So you just kind of learn to do some of this stuff. And it's one of those things, if you don't do it very often, you kind of forget at times. But being able to take a hemp rope or cotton rope and back splice it, just keep it from unraveling, is a pretty handy ability to do. And I've already tied this with a clove hitch, and I'm just going to put a secondary clove hitch behind it to tie it off, and that'll secure these ropes for the top canvas. Sitting here playing with these knots on the sheep wagon covers, it kind of takes me back a number of years ago when I was much younger, probably 30, 35 years ago. And I had some hired help here, and we were sitting around the fire kind of talking about tying knots, like young guys do, especially if you cowboy a bit. And we were playing with our bowlines and our sheep shanks, and even the simple fundamentals of even how to tell the difference between a square knot and a granny knot. Well, we were sitting there playing around and kind of chewing the fat a little bit, and difference between a bowline and a hondo, and they're really pretty close to the same. And we were tying hangman nooses and just kind of having a good time. And I remember as we were kind of playing with our ropes, he said, "You ever seen a dragon knot?" Well, I kind of like, learning how to tie different knots, and I had never heard about the dragon knot before. So you've never heard about the dragon knot? No, I don't think I've ever heard about the dragon knot. I tied a lot of knots. And so he took the end of his rope and he put a simple overhand knot in it, stood up and walked away, and he said, "That's the dragon knot." Sure enough, had me on that one. Well, another little loose end I need to kind of tie up is the latch for this rear tailgate. You see, he's brought a number of different things here that he would like to put in the sheep wagon, an old pair of boots and some blankets, some of that stuff I showed you before. But he brought an old piece of harness leather in. I put part of it here as a bumper for this tailgate latch. And I thought I'd use the remaining part of it just to put in there, something that maybe an old shepherd might do just to kind of get by. But I've got a little piece of chain that I ran through the sandblaster, and I put that vinegar rust on it. I think I'm just going to chain it to this rod here, just so when he takes it off, he'll keep track of that little piece of leather. You know, just trying to kind of keep it in character of what some old shepherd might do. Probably use his pocket knife for this. Maybe kind of like so. Just chain this to this top rail here. I wonder if he wouldn't have just dug through his scrap pile and said, yeah, that'll sure enough work. You know, I'm working on this kind of stuff, just figuring how it would be put together, kind of makeshift. But you know, the man that owned this, who was an uncle of the man who owns it now, well, he had a brother, had several different brothers and sister, and we had an opportunity after a brother of the uncle that owned this wagon. After he died, we leased that place of his brother's from his sister. And it was 1,600 acres. We had just a portion of that, you know, maybe section total. But as I got to kind of learn about this man, I learned about who he was from looking at the loafing sheds and his corrals and the hardware and how he put things together. And, you know, that kind of influences how I think maybe this man would have put together his sheep wagon. Kind of like this little leather strap here. I can see his brother doing the exact same thing, so I'm speculating probably this uncle would have done it this way as well. Just good enough to get by, and that'll sure enough work, and that'll be good. You know, we spent 9 years on that brother's place and lived in his house, and I calved calves in his corrals, and just really got to appreciate how he thought, because in a lot of ways I kind of think the same thing. You know, as much as I try to do things correctly here in the shop, you know, I do recognize what I have oftentimes called been farmerized. But most of that just comes from a matter of necessity. It's what you have, it's what you make do with, and it's kind of like this stovetop here. You know, when I was asking him about, do you want a rain cap on here? And he said, why? It's going inside. And his next comment was, if he was going to store this and wanted rain out of there, he just put a coffee can on it anyway. Well, in all the rubble, if you remember, I found this little turn latch that was on the center post frame that holds these two doors closed. So I figured since that was the style that was used there, why not the same on the rear window? And he also found an expandable mattress. It's a twin size. It's just the right length this way, but it's a little narrow this way. A double or full probably would have fitted better, but that's what he brought. I think I'll put the same type of a turn latch on this window. Now I know many of you are older than I am. I'm 70, and I remember growing up in an old farmhouse. How did you keep your windows open? You prop it up with a stick. You know, the day we live in now, how much stuff is battery operated? Even go back to some Coleman lanterns, and they're propane operated. But they didn't have so much of this back in that day, I don't think. He did find this old kerosene lantern, and he asked if I would make a hook, could hang it. So I just took an old piece of rusty wire, and he can hang that lantern there while he's cooking, or he could move it back, you know, maybe back closer to the bed by the kitchen. He can kind of put it wherever he would like. Well, this is kind of an interesting addition to this sheep wagon. The owner of this, who ran sheep, this is his original shepherd's hook. Kind of cool. This is where you would catch the legs. Not really sure what this end is all about. Maybe for catching the neck, be my guess. That's pretty cool. You know, it may seem like when we start a project like this sheep wagon or this manure spreader, and it comes in just a state of disrepair, a pile of rubble, a pile of junk, whatever term you want to put onto it. You know, we might look at it and say, you know, this is pretty monumental. Are we going to be able to do this? Well, also as monumental is sometimes getting to that finish line. I know when I come to this stage of a project, these little details to finish it up sometimes becomes more difficult because you are in a state of perseverance to get it done. And sometimes I have to write out a little checklist and say, well, I need the tailgate latch. I need my ropes back spliced, you know, yada, yada, yada. One thing on my list to do, and it might be the last thing on this list, is inside, below or above, but in this case I'm going to put it below the rear window. Oftentimes there is a little shelf. So as the shepherd is laying in bed, he needs a place to put his book or a glass of water or whatever. It's very common to have a shelf there. There was nothing left on this back wall, so I have nothing to go off of other than looking at multiple sheep wagons, and that's a common thing. I have a little bit of old wood left that I've been kind of setting aside for this shelf, and I think this might just wrap it up. Well, that just about wraps up this project. You got to see in the last 2 minutes what we accomplished over the last 7 months. I'll put this together in a synoptic version as well, and I think I'm going to deliver this to the museum, so hopefully I can show you part of that where it will end up as well. Appreciate y'all coming along. It's been quite a journey. Thanks for watching.